My grandmother's will required her grandchildren to eliminate each other from inheritance. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a courier who waited while I signed for it with shaking hands. The envelope was thick cream paper with my grandmother's monogram embossed in gold, the same stationery she'd used for birthday cards and Christmas notes my entire life. Inside, her familiar handwriting covered 3 pages in careful script, each word deliberate and precise as everything else she'd ever done. My dearest Natalia, it began. If you are reading this, I have passed away and my attorney has begun executing my final wishes. What follows may shock you, but I assure you every decision has been made with careful consideration and deep love for all my grandchildren. I sat at my kitchen table reading those opening lines over and over, trying to understand why receiving a letter from my deceased grandmother felt like the beginning of something terrible. She'd died 2 weeks earlier at 91, surrounded by family in the mansion where she'd lived her entire adult life. The funeral had been elegant and somber, exactly as she would have wanted. I have watched each of you grow into remarkable young adults, and I am proud of the people you have become. However, I have also observed troubling patterns of entitlement and complacency among my grandchildren. You have grown accustomed to the comfort my wealth provides without truly understanding its value or the responsibility that comes with it. My stomach started churning as I read those words. Grandmother Evelyn had always been stern but fair, expecting excellence from everyone around her while providing unwavering support. She'd paid for private schools, college tuitions, and graduate programs for all 7 of her grandchildren without ever making us feel like we owed her anything. The idea that she saw us as entitled felt like a betrayal. Therefore, I have designed what I call the worthiness assessment. Over the next 6 months, you and your 6 cousins will participate in a series of challenges designed to test your character, intelligence, resourcefulness, and commitment to family values. At the end of this period, only 1 grandchild will inherit my estate in its entirety. The others will receive nothing. The words blurred as I stared at them, my coffee growing cold in my hands. This couldn't be real. Grandmother Evelyn had always preached about family unity and supporting each other. The woman who taught me to braid friendship bracelets and shared her secret recipe for apple pie couldn't have designed a system to pit us against each other. The assessment will be administered by my trusted attorney, Mr. Whitmore, who has detailed instructions regarding each phase. Your first challenge begins immediately and will test your response to this news. How you handle this information and interact with your cousins over the next 72 hours will determine your initial ranking. I dropped the letter and reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts to find my cousin David's number. We were the closest in age and had always been allies during family gatherings. If anyone would help me make sense of this insanity, it would be him. Nat, thank God you called, David answered on the first ring. Did you get the letter? Please tell me you got the same insane letter I got. The worthiness assessment, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She wants us to eliminate each other from inheritance. David, this can't be real. I'm sitting in my car outside Whitmore's office right now. I drove here as soon as I finished reading it. The receptionist confirmed he's expecting all 7 of us to schedule individual meetings this week. She wouldn't tell me anything else, but Nat. She looked at me like she pitied me. The reality of the situation started sinking in as I heard the strain in David's voice. This wasn't some elaborate joke or misunderstanding. Our grandmother had genuinely designed a competition where 6 of her grandchildren would be left with nothing. Have you talked to anyone else yet? I asked, already dreading the answer. That's the thing. The letter specifically says we're being monitored starting now. How we handle this information, whether we try to coordinate or conspire, it's all part of the first test. I wanted to call everyone immediately, but what if that's exactly what she doesn't want us to do? I walked to my window and stared out at the street where I'd grown up, where grandmother Evelyn had lived just 3 blocks away in her Victorian mansion. She used to walk to our house every Sunday for dinner, bringing fresh flowers from her garden and stories about her week. The woman I remembered wouldn't have created a system designed to destroy family relationships. We need more information, I said finally. I'm calling Whitmore and scheduling a meeting for today. We can figure out how to handle this after we understand what we're actually dealing with. Nat, wait. What if the first test is seeing who calls the attorney first? What if being proactive helps us or hurts us? We don't know the rules. David's paranoia was starting to affect me, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me completely. Then I guess I'll find out. I'd rather take action than sit here wondering what she wanted from us. Mr. Whitmore's office occupied the top floor of a downtown building that had been elegant decades ago, but now felt tired and forgotten. The elevator creaked as it climbed, and the hallway smelled like old carpet and disappointment. His receptionist, a woman in her 70s with carefully styled gray hair, looked up when I entered and smiled with what might have been sympathy. You must be one of Mrs. Holloway's grandchildren, she said in a gentle voice. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you, dear. He's been preparing for these meetings for months. The attorney's office was exactly what I'd expected from someone who'd worked with my grandmother for 40 years. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and photographs of distinguished-looking people in expensive frames. Mr. Whitmore himself was tall and thin, with white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Natalia, please sit down, he said, gesturing to a chair across from his massive desk. I imagine you have questions about your grandmother's final wishes. I need to understand what she was thinking, I said without preamble. This assessment idea, it's not like her. She always taught us that family was more important than money. Mr. Whitmore opened a thick folder and removed a document I recognized as my grandmother's will. The official version was much longer than the letter I'd received, filled with legal terminology and specific instructions that made my head spin. Your grandmother spent 2 years planning this assessment, he said carefully. She consulted with child psychologists, business strategists, and family counselors to design something she believed would reveal each grandchild's true character. She was deeply concerned about the impact of inherited wealth on young people. But why eliminate 6 of us completely? Why not just distribute the money differently? She felt that partial inheritance would still enable what she called comfortable mediocrity. She wanted to ensure that whoever received her fortune would truly value it and use it responsibly. In her words, the assessment would identify the grandchild most likely to honor her legacy. I stared at the will, trying to process the magnitude of what my grandmother had planned. Her estate was worth over $15 million, including the mansion, her art collection, and various investments. Losing access to that inheritance would completely change the trajectory of any of our lives. How does the assessment work? I asked. 6 challenges over 6 months. Each challenge tests different qualities she valued: integrity, intelligence, compassion, leadership, resourcefulness, and family loyalty. You'll receive detailed instructions before each phase, and your performance will be evaluated by independent judges she selected before her death. Independent judges? Community leaders, business professionals, and family friends who knew your grandmother well. People she trusted to evaluate her grandchildren fairly. Their identities will remain confidential throughout the process to prevent any attempts at influence or manipulation. The whole system was more elaborate than I'd imagined, and somehow that made it more frightening. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in grief or illness. My grandmother had spent years crafting a methodical process to determine which of her grandchildren deserved her fortune. Mr. Whitmore, can I ask you something? Do you think this is fair? He was quiet for a long moment, removing his glasses to clean them slowly. When he looked at me again, his expression was carefully neutral. Your grandmother was one of the most thoughtful people I've ever known. She never made important decisions impulsively. Whether I agree with this approach personally is irrelevant. My job is to execute her wishes exactly as she intended. That evening, I drove to the coffee shop where my cousins and I had agreed to meet. The letter had specifically mentioned that our interactions during the first 72 hours would be monitored and evaluated, but none of us could stand the isolation of processing this alone. David was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop open and papers spread across the table. My cousin Sophie walked in a few minutes later, her usually perfect makeup smudged from crying. She'd always been the most emotional of our group, and the stress was clearly destroying her. "This is insane," Sophie said as she slumped into the booth. "I called my parents and they acted like they knew this was coming. Like they've been preparing for it. How long have the adults known about this assessment?" "The whole family knew," David said grimly, looking up from his laptop screen. "I've been researching inheritance law all afternoon. Whitmore filed the will with the court 6 months ago. Our parents, our aunts and uncles, everyone knew what was coming and nobody warned us." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had our grandmother designed this competition, but our entire extended family had kept it secret. They'd watched us plan our futures, make financial decisions, and build expectations around inheritance money they knew we might never receive. "Where is everyone else?" I asked, looking around the nearly empty coffee shop. "That's the most messed up part," Sophie said. "Rebecca and James aren't coming. Rebecca said she doesn't want to be seen conspiring with us because it might hurt her chances. James said the same thing. They're already treating us like competition instead of family." My youngest cousins, twins Alexis and Nathan, arrived together looking shell-shocked. They were both 21 and had been planning to use their inheritance to start a nonprofit organization. The idea that their grandmother's money might not materialize was devastating to them. "I don't understand how she could do this to us," Alexis said as she sat down. "We're her grandchildren. We loved her. How could she turn us against each other like this?" Nathan pulled out his phone and showed us a text message. "Rebecca sent this an hour ago. She says anyone who participates in group meetings is showing weakness and poor strategic thinking. She's already positioning herself as the serious candidate who understands the rules." The text was cold and calculating. Nothing like the Rebecca I'd grown up with. She'd always been competitive, but she'd also been loyal to family. The assessment was already changing how we saw each other and how we saw ourselves. "What do we do?" Sophie asked. "If we work together, are we breaking the rules? If we don't work together, are we abandoning each other?" "I think that's exactly what she wanted," David said. "The first test is seeing how we handle this impossible situation. Do we maintain family bonds, or do we immediately start competing?" Over the next 2 hours, we tried to figure out a strategy that would allow us to preserve our relationships while still participating in the assessment. It quickly became clear that any cooperation would disadvantage all of us compared to cousins who were willing to play the game ruthlessly. "Maybe we should just refuse to participate," Alexis suggested. "If none of us play along, she can't divide us. But she can still give the money to whoever she considers most worthy," Nathan pointed out. "Even refusing to participate is a choice that gets evaluated." We left the coffee shop that night without reaching any agreement about how to proceed. The assessment had been active for less than 24 hours, and it was already fracturing relationships that had taken decades to build. The first official challenge arrived via email 3 days later. The subject line read, Phase 1, Moral Integrity Assessment, and the message contained detailed instructions that made my stomach drop. Each grandchild will be presented with an ethical dilemma that tests their commitment to doing what is right rather than what is convenient or profitable. You have 72 hours to complete this challenge. Your response will be evaluated by 3 independent judges who will score you on moral reasoning, personal sacrifice, and consistency between stated values and actual behavior. Attached to the email was a specific scenario tailored to my personal situation. A nonprofit organization where I volunteered was being investigated for financial irregularities. The director, someone I'd known and trusted for years, had asked me to provide false testimony that would protect both the organization and several prominent donors who might face legal consequences. The ethical choice was obvious: tell the truth regardless of the personal and professional costs. But the challenge was more complex than simply knowing right from wrong. I had to actually follow through on the moral choice while being evaluated on how I handled the pressure, stress, and consequences. I called the investigative reporter who'd been looking into the nonprofit's finances and arranged to meet her the next morning. Providing accurate information about the organization's practices would probably result in criminal charges for people I cared about, but lying to protect them would compromise my own integrity. The meeting took place in a downtown diner where the reporter, a woman named Kelly Vaughn, listened carefully as I explained what I'd observed during my volunteer work. She asked detailed questions about financial records, donor interactions, and management decisions that painted a clear picture of deliberate fraud. "You understand this information will likely result in federal charges," Kelly said as she closed her notebook. "The people you're testifying against won't appreciate your cooperation." "I understand," I said, though my hands were shaking as I spoke. "It's still the right thing to do." 3 days later, the nonprofit's director and 2 board members were arrested on embezzlement charges. My name appeared in several news articles as a key witness, and I received angry phone calls from donors who felt I'd betrayed their trust. The moral choice had been clear, but living with the consequences was harder than I'd expected. The results of Phase 1 arrived the following week via another formal email from Mr. Whitmore. Out of 7 grandchildren, I'd placed 3rd in the moral integrity assessment. Rebecca had placed 1st by reporting financial irregularities at her own law firm, sacrificing a promotion and several professional relationships. David had placed 2nd by returning money he'd discovered his employer was stealing from client accounts. James, Sophie, Alexis, and Nathan had all failed Phase 1 by choosing self-preservation over moral courage. James had refused to report safety violations at his construction company. Sophie had stayed silent about a friend's insurance fraud. The twins had ignored evidence of academic dishonesty in their graduate programs. "Performance in Phase 1 affects your starting position for subsequent challenges," the email explained. "Grandchildren ranked in the bottom half will face increased difficulty in future assessments." The scoring system was designed to be cumulative and punitive. Early failures would make later success nearly impossible, while early success would provide significant advantages. My grandmother had created a system where falling behind quickly became insurmountable. Phase 2 began the following Monday with an intelligence and problem-solving assessment that required each grandchild to complete a complex business scenario within 1 week. We were given identical startups to manage virtually, with detailed financial projections, market research, and competitive analysis to consider. The twist was that our virtual companies were designed to interact with each other. Decisions made by one grandchild would directly affect the other's performance, creating opportunities for both cooperation and sabotage. Success required not just business acumen, but strategic thinking about family dynamics. Rebecca immediately began trying to manipulate the market conditions to disadvantage other companies. She launched aggressive pricing strategies, poached virtual employees from competitors, and spread negative publicity about products developed by her cousin's companies. David tried to organize a cooperative approach where all 7 companies would benefit from shared resources and coordinated strategies. But cooperation required trust that Rebecca and James had already destroyed through their competitive behavior. I decided to focus on building the strongest possible company independently while remaining open to mutually beneficial partnerships. It was a moderate strategy that avoided both Rebecca's ruthless competition and David's naive cooperation. The results were revealing in ways that went beyond business performance. Rebecca's company achieved the highest profits, but only by destroying market conditions for everyone else. David's company failed completely because he kept sacrificing his own success to help cousins who didn't reciprocate. My moderate approach earned 2nd place, while the twins and Sophie struggled with the basic business concepts. Phase 2 reveals each grandchild's approach to competition, cooperation, and strategic thinking, Mr. Whitmore explained during our follow-up meeting. "Your grandmother was particularly interested in seeing how you would balance family loyalty with personal success." "What did she want us to do?" I asked. "Cooperate and fail? Or compete and destroy each other?" "She wanted to see who would find a third option. Someone who could succeed individually while maintaining ethical standards and family relationships. So far, only you and Rebecca have demonstrated that capability, though with very different approaches." After 2 phases, Rebecca led with 94 points, I was 2nd with 87 points, and David had dropped to 3rd with 79 points. The twins were tied for 4th with 71 points each. Sophie had 68 points, and James was in last place with 65 points. The rankings were posted on a private website where we could track our progress relative to each other. Seeing our names arranged in that hierarchy made the competition feel more real and more destructive. We were being ranked like contestants on a game show rather than grieving grandchildren. Phase 3 was the compassion assessment, and it arrived with instructions that made me question everything I thought I knew about my grandmother's values. Each grandchild will be given an opportunity to demonstrate genuine compassion through personal sacrifice for others. The specific situation will test whether you prioritize the welfare of strangers over your own comfort, convenience, or success. This assessment cannot be faked or performed for credit. My challenge involved volunteering at a homeless shelter during a particularly brutal winter week when the facility was overwhelmed with people seeking warmth and safety. The work was physically demanding, emotionally draining, and completely unpaid. I had to cancel several important meetings and postpone a job interview to meet the time requirements. But something strange happened during those 5 days of intensive volunteer work. I started remembering why my grandmother had always emphasized service to others and social responsibility. She'd never just talked about helping people, she'd actually done it, donating both money and time to causes she cared about. Working alongside people experiencing homelessness, I began to understand the perspective my grandmother might have wanted us to develop. The inheritance assessment wasn't just about determining who deserved money. It was about ensuring that whoever received her fortune would use it responsibly to benefit others. "You seem different," David said when we met for coffee after Phase 3 results were announced. "More serious, maybe, or more focused." "I think I'm starting to understand what she was trying to teach us," I admitted. "Not just about money, but about responsibility and purpose." David had struggled with the compassion assessment, placing 5th overall and falling further behind in the cumulative rankings. The stress was clearly affecting him, and I could see the same exhaustion in Sophie and the twins. Only Rebecca and I seemed to be thriving under the pressure. "Rebecca's becoming someone I don't recognize," David continued. "She's been calling other family members trying to get information about the judges, researching their backgrounds and interests. She's treating this like a political campaign instead of a character assessment." The change in Rebecca was disturbing to all of us. She'd always been ambitious, but the assessment had amplified her competitive instincts until they overshadowed everything else about her personality. She'd stopped responding to text messages from cousins and avoided family gatherings where she might be seen fraternizing with the competition. Phase 4 was the leadership assessment, requiring each grandchild to organize and execute a community service project within 1 month. The challenge was designed to test our ability to inspire others, manage resources effectively, and create positive change in areas we cared about. I chose to organize a literacy program for underprivileged children, partnering with local schools and libraries to provide tutoring services and book donations. The project required recruiting volunteers, securing funding, and coordinating schedules across multiple organizations. The work was challenging but rewarding in ways that had nothing to do with the inheritance competition. Watching kids discover the joy of reading reminded me why education and community involvement had always been important to my grandmother. She'd served on school boards, funded library programs, and tutored students for decades. Rebecca organized a legal aid clinic for low-income families, demonstrating impressive organizational skills but approaching the work with calculated efficiency rather than genuine passion. Her project was successful but felt more like a resume builder than an expression of compassion. David struggled to complete his environmental cleanup project, lacking the leadership skills necessary to motivate volunteers and manage complex logistics. Sophie's mental health awareness campaign fell apart when she became too overwhelmed to coordinate events effectively. After 4 phases, the rankings had become more entrenched. Rebecca maintained her lead with 192 points, while I held second place with 181 points. David had fallen to 4th place behind James, and the twins were struggling in 6th and 7th place respectively. The cumulative scoring system meant that early failures became increasingly difficult to overcome, while early success created momentum that compounded over time. My grandmother had designed a process that rewarded consistent excellence rather than sporadic brilliance. Phase 5 was the resourcefulness assessment, presenting each grandchild with a specific problem that required creative problem-solving with limited resources. The challenges were designed to test our ability to think strategically, adapt to unexpected circumstances, and achieve goals despite significant constraints. My challenge required organizing housing for 50 homeless families during a winter storm that had overwhelmed the city's shelter system. I had 72 hours, a budget of $5,000, and access to a network of contacts, but no guaranteed cooperation from any organization or individual. The solution required combining multiple approaches, negotiating with hotels for discounted rooms, organizing temporary housing with faith communities, coordinating meal services through restaurant partnerships, and managing transportation to ensure families could reach available beds safely. The work was exhausting and stressful, requiring constant communication with dozens of people while adapting to changing circumstances and unexpected problems. But it was also deeply satisfying in ways that surprised me. The skills I'd developed through 4 previous assessments were finally combining into something that felt like genuine leadership capability. Rebecca's resourcefulness challenge involved organizing disaster relief after a major apartment fire displaced 40 families. She approached the problem with characteristic efficiency, creating systematic processes for everything from temporary housing to insurance claims assistance. But I began noticing something troubling about Rebecca's approach to the challenges. She was achieving impressive results, but her methods were becoming increasingly manipulative. She'd started using emotional appeals and personal relationships to gain advantages that other grandchildren couldn't access. During a brief encounter at Mr. Whitmore's office, I overheard Rebecca on the phone with someone she addressed as Judge. She was discussing her disaster relief project in terms that suggested she knew the identity of at least one assessment evaluator. "Rebecca's been researching the judges for months," David confirmed when I mentioned my concerns. "She figured out who they are by cross-referencing community leaders my grandmother worked with and analyzing evaluation patterns from early phases. She's tailoring her performance to what she knows they want to see." The revelation was disturbing but not entirely surprising. Rebecca had always been willing to bend rules to achieve her goals, and the inheritance assessment provided strong motivation for increasingly aggressive tactics. "Are you going to report her?" David asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "If she's found out about the judges through legitimate research, I'm not sure it counts as cheating, but it definitely feels like she's violating the spirit of what grandmother wanted." Phase 6, the final assessment, was scheduled to begin the following Monday. The email announcing it contained more detailed instructions than any previous challenge, along with a warning that made my stomach clench. The family loyalty assessment will test each grandchild's commitment to honoring relationships and maintaining trust, even under extreme pressure. This final phase carries double weight in the overall scoring and has the potential to completely change the rankings based on performance. The specific challenge required each grandchild to make a choice between personal advancement and family welfare. We would be presented with an opportunity to significantly boost our own assessment scores by providing information that would damage other grandchildren's chances. My challenge arrived as a phone call from someone identifying herself as Dr. Patricia Mullins, one of the independent judges evaluating the assessment. She explained that she had concerns about potential rule violations by other grandchildren and was offering me the opportunity to provide information about any unethical behavior I'd observed. Specifically, we're investigating whether any participants have attempted to identify or influence assessment judges, Dr. Mullins said. Your cooperation in this investigation could significantly improve your final ranking. The offer was exactly what I'd expected after discovering Rebecca's research into the judges' identities. This was my opportunity to report her rule violations and potentially secure the inheritance for myself. All I had to do was betray my cousin. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course. You have 24 hours to decide whether you want to cooperate with our investigation. I spent that entire night walking around my neighborhood, trying to figure out what my grandmother would have wanted me to do. The decision seemed simple on the surface. Report Rebecca's cheating and win the inheritance fairly. But something about the situation felt wrong. If my grandmother had truly wanted us to betray each other for money, why had she spent years teaching us about family loyalty and supporting each other? The woman who'd helped me through my parents' divorce and celebrated every small success couldn't have intended for her grandchildren to destroy each other. The next morning, I called Dr. Mullins and declined to provide information about other grandchildren's behavior. Even if providing that information would improve your chances of inheritance? She asked. Especially then, I said. My grandmother taught me that family loyalty matters more than money. The final assessment results were scheduled to be announced at a family gathering the following Sunday. All 7 grandchildren were required to attend, along with our parents and Mr. Whitmore, for the reading of the official results and distribution of inheritance. I arrived at my grandmother's mansion that afternoon feeling strangely calm despite months of stress and competition. The house looked exactly as it had during childhood visits, filled with antique furniture, family photographs, and the scent of her favorite lavender candles. Rebecca was already there when I arrived, looking confident and polished in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She'd clearly expected to win and dressed for the victory celebration she anticipated. David, Sophie, and the twins arrived together, looking resigned to disappointment but grateful that the ordeal was finally ending. James came alone and immediately isolated himself in a corner, apparently having given up entirely during the final phases. Mr. Whitmore stood at the front of the living room with a thick folder containing the final assessment results. The independent judges had submitted their evaluations and the cumulative scoring had determined which grandchild would inherit my grandmother's entire fortune. Before I announce the results, Mr. Whitmore began, I want to read a final letter your grandmother wrote to be shared at this moment. He opened an envelope with my grandmother's familiar handwriting and began reading her words aloud to our assembled family. My dearest grandchildren, if you are hearing this letter, you have completed the worthiness assessment I designed to test your character, intelligence, compassion, leadership, resourcefulness, and family loyalty. I want you to understand that this process was never really about determining who deserves money. Confusion rippled through the room as we tried to process what she was saying. The assessment was designed to teach you lessons I feared you might not learn otherwise. Lessons about the corrupting influence of inherited wealth, the importance of earning what you receive, and the danger of prioritizing money over relationships. Rebecca's confident expression started to falter as the implications of my grandmother's words became clear. Therefore, I am pleased to announce that every grandchild who participated in the assessment with integrity and maintained their commitment to family loyalty will receive an equal share of my estate. The money has been held in trust for 6 months while you demonstrated your values through your choices. The room erupted in surprised voices as we tried to understand what had actually happened. There had never been a single winner. The entire competition had been an elaborate test designed to teach us lessons about money, family, and character. However, Mr. Whitmore continued reading, any grandchild who attempted to cheat, manipulate judges, or betray family members for personal gain has forfeited their inheritance entirely. Rebecca went completely white as she realized what this meant for her systematic rule violations and manipulation of the assessment process. Based on the judges' evaluations, 6 grandchildren will inherit equal shares of my estate. Rebecca Morrison has been disqualified for multiple ethical violations, including judge identification, manipulation of assessment conditions, and attempted bribery. The irony was devastating and perfect. Rebecca had been so focused on winning the competition that she'd lost sight of the values my grandmother had actually been testing. Her superior performance in individual challenges meant nothing compared to her failure in the one area that mattered most, maintaining integrity under pressure. Additionally, each grandchild will receive a personal letter explaining what your grandmother observed about your character development during the assessment and her hopes for how you will use this inheritance responsibly. My letter, delivered privately after the family gathering ended, contained words that brought tears to my eyes and helped me understand the woman who'd raised us with such intentional love. Natalia, you demonstrated exactly the balance of strength and compassion I had hoped to see in my grandchildren. You competed when necessary, cooperated when possible, and never sacrificed your integrity for advantage. Use this inheritance to build the kind of life that honors our family's values while creating positive change in the world. 6 months after my grandmother's death, I finally understood that her greatest gift to us had never been money. It was the knowledge that we could trust ourselves to make difficult choices, support each other through challenges, and remain true to our values even when the stakes were high. The inheritance allowed me to start the literacy nonprofit I'd dreamed about for years, working with the same communities I'd discovered during the assessment. Rebecca eventually moved across the country and cut contact with the family entirely, unable to forgive herself or us for the choice she'd made. But the rest of us grew closer through the experience, understanding that the bonds between us were worth more than any amount of money our grandmother could have left behind. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.